Imagine for a second you lived in a small, quaint town. Everyone is lovely, friendly, and on a first-name basis. There's a local school, a local playground, and even a local doctor who's loved by all. Now imagine if this small town had one killer roaming around in their midst. This killer is so smart, so cunning, so unbelievably good at taking lives that no one thinks for a moment he could be the killer. The corpses keep piling, but no one suspects him. How could they? He lived among them and went to work in the heart of town. He waved to their kids. He was hiding in plain sight. So who was he really? How come no one suspected him? Did his atrocities ever come to light? Was he ever caught? This story is one that will leave you on the edge of your seat. This is not fiction. It is as real as it gets. And it all began in 1946 when a humble British woman gave birth to her one and only son, Harold. The beginning. Born in Nottingham to a devoted and loving mother, Harold Shipman grew up to mostly what his mother taught him, and as reports claim, she was caring and devoted, while some other reports hold that she was strict and instilled discipline in her son. She wouldn't accept anything less than an A in any of his subjects. She pushed him to study hard, do his homework, and pass all his exams. So, as a kid, Harold was faced with the pressure of being the best amongst his peers, and that he did. He loved his mother, so he would do anything to make her happy, from topping his class to making sure that he excelled in everything he did. There was no stopping him. On top of that training, his mother ensured to always let him know he was better than everyone else. She would tell him how great he was and how no one on the planet was a match for him. Now, as a child, Harold listened to his mother's words and let them sink into his being. And so, as a result, little by little, he began to believe the words. He began to consider himself superior to all those around him. He was already doing well in school, so it was easy to look down on others. Reports say that at a young age, Harold had a serious superiority complex, and this would play out greatly in his life later on. But let's not get ahead of ourselves just yet. The revelation. Now, Harold's mother worked 2 jobs, and she did all she could to provide for her beloved son. And as you might imagine, she stretched the capabilities of her body so much that she could fall sick from time to time. So sick that she couldn't go to the clinic. So the doctor had to make a house call. And when this happened, a new fascination began to brew in little Harold. He would sit and watch the doctor attend to his mother. She would be in so much pain, but the doctor wouldn't be fazed. He'd simply reach into his bag and pull out a vial labeled morphine and then inject it into her vein. Within a few minutes, Harold would watch his mum relax and suddenly feel so much better. It was amazing, the way the doctor knew what to do at all times. The way he held the power of life and earth in his hands. In that single moment, Harold knew what he wanted for his life. He wanted to become a doctor and nothing else. It was that simple. From that moment on, he steered his life towards being a doctor. He took the right subjects in high school. He studied the right books, and eventually his interest in medicine grew so large he couldn't contain it. Eventually, Harold went to Leeds School of Medicine, where he nursed his passion and interest in the field. Thankfully, not only was he passionate, he was also smart and he studied really hard. And years later, he graduated and became a doctor, making his mother the proudest woman in all of England. This is good, right? The story is going so well. What could possibly go wrong? Well, you know Harold was a smart boy. You know he was very studious and hard-working. But here's what you don't know. He was not all sunshine and rainbows because just a year after becoming a full-fledged medical practitioner, he got himself involved with something so dangerous that his career hung in the balance. It turned out that Harold, now becoming a doctor and having access to medicine and drugs of all kinds, became addicted to a drug called pethidine. Now, why did he become addicted to such a substance in the first place? Well, it's hard to tell, but here's a theory. Let's rewind a bit to that moment when little Harold watched a doctor give his mother morphine for her pains. Remember how fascinated he was, how impressed he had been. Well, it's not entirely far-fetched to believe that he took a liking to drugs and how it could literally change the trajectory of someone's life. One moment, you're in pain. Next, you're completely fine, all with one dose of the right medicine. Maybe that childhood fascination was what fueled his curiosity to try pethidine. And what was pethidine really? Well, a painkiller. Not a bad theory, is it? Eventually, his addiction was brought to light and it was discovered that he would write himself prescriptions just to be able to take the painkiller. He should have his license revoked. But no, he was given a slap on the wrist with a 600-pound fine and a short suspension. Now, as you might imagine, this is a terrible fate for a doctor. Even after he paid the fine and observed his suspension, one thing was for sure. He couldn't possibly show his face in his clinic anymore. No one would trust him. His image had been dented. So what did he do? The only rational thing for him to do at the time: move. So he did, this time to a small town in Manchester. And there he evolved into the full extent of himself. A side of him was so dark, even he didn't see it coming. The first taste. Just like the place he was coming from, Harold became the go-to local doctor in his new town. To the townsfolk, he was the very embodiment of a friendly neighborhood doctor. His unassuming clinic was nestled among rows of charming houses. Dr. Shipman's practice was modest, but his ambition was boundless. In those early days, he moved from house to house, making house calls to tend to the ailing and provide solace to the suffering. His footsteps echoed through narrow alleys as he carried his black bag, a symbol of hope for many. With a warm smile and reassuring presence, he eased the worries of his patients and their families. Dr. Shipman wasn't just a doctor, he was a confidant, a trusted friend. He listened intently to their concerns, offering both medical expertise and a sympathetic ear. No one could resist his charm. The people of Manchester began to place their lives, their health, and their trust in the hands of Dr. Shipman. He had earned their faith not only through his medical skills, but also with his unwavering commitment to their well-being. He attended generations of families, from cradle to grave, and his practice flourished. Now this is where the story takes a dark turn. To the people of the town, Harold was more than just a doctor. He was a lifeline, a beacon of hope in times of distress. They followed his medical advice without question, taking their prescribed medications religiously like devoted disciples. With each diagnosis and each prescription, Shipman's sense of power swelled. He reveled in the unquestioning faith of his patients and their unwavering reliance on his judgment. It was as if he had ascended to a godlike status in the eyes of the town. But as the adoration and reverence grew, so did his own sense of superiority. In the quiet hours of his office, he would hear the echoes of his mother's voice, a voice that whispered insidiously in his mind, telling him he was better than everyone else, that he held the power of life and death over his patients. It was a dangerous thought, one that festered like a dormant virus. Then, one fateful day, he succumbed to the sinister allure of his newfound power. It was a decision that would forever change the course of his life and the lives of those who trusted him. His first victim was an elderly woman, frail and vulnerable. With calculated precision, he administered a lethal dose of medication, watching as she slumped in her chair, life slipping away. Her death was so subtle, so seemingly natural, that not a single soul suspected foul play. Dr. Shipman signed the death certificate with an air of authority, assuring everyone that the woman had passed away due to age and illness. She was laid to rest, and the town mourned her loss, never suspecting the truth that lurked behind the facade of their trusted physician. Harold couldn't believe the rush of power that surged through him as he realized he had gotten away with murder. It was intoxicating, a sadistic wave of euphoria that coursed through his veins. He had tasted the forbidden fruit and wanted more. Thus, in the shadows of his pristine clinic, Dr. Death was born, a sinister after-ego hidden behind the friendly neighborhood doctor. Insatiable thirst. Harold Shipman, the man who had already taken his first life, was spiraling into an abyss of insatiable bloodlust. Most of his unsuspecting victims were elderly ladies, and he repeated the same horrific pattern again and again, with a thirst for power and influence that had become twisted and sadistic. By 1999, Shipman had claimed the lives of over 21 people in almost identical fashion. His victims were discovered slumped in their chairs, their lives extinguished in an instant. You might wonder why no one was connecting the dots, why no one could see that Shipman's patients were dying at a rate nearly tenfold higher than other doctors. The answer lay in his facade. He presented himself as a charming and friendly neighborhood doctor. His charisma was a smokescreen, concealing the darkness that lurked within him. Unbeknownst to the townfolk, Shipman continued his subtle killing spree, hiding in plain sight and perpetuating the lie that his victims had succumbed to natural causes. But little did he know his luck was about to run out, setting the stage for a dramatic turn of events that would ultimately expose the horrifying truth behind the friendly face of the neighborhood doctor. Connecting the dots. In the eerie backdrop of Harold Shipman's sinister actions, a glimmer of hope emerged in the form of a vigilant taxi driver named John Shaw. In August 1998, Shaw courageously took the initiative to inform the police about his unsettling observations, setting in motion a chain of events that would gradually connect the ominous dots. Shaw's concerns were well-founded. He couldn't help but notice that a significant number of elderly women whom he had driven to Shipman's medical center in seemingly good health inexplicably passed away while under the doctor's care. These deaths were mounting, and they painted a chilling picture that pointed directly at their seemingly friendly neighborhood doctor. However, the initial response from the authorities was disheartening. Despite Shaw's tip-off and the mounting suspicion surrounding Shipman, the police investigation did not yield enough concrete evidence to proceed. The case was prematurely closed, and once again, Shipman managed to slip through the grasp of justice. But fate had other plans for the cunning doctor. In a fateful twist of events, Shipman eventually crossed paths with the wrong patient, and for our not-so-good doctor, it marked the beginning of the end. The wrong patient. Her name was Kathleen Grundy, a patient under the care of Harold Shipman, and who unwittingly became a target of his sinister web of deceit. What made her particularly alluring as a proposed victim was not only her advanced age, but also her substantial wealth. In Harold's eyes, Grundy presented a golden opportunity to amass a fortune by orchestrating her demise and redirecting her valuable assets and properties into his own grasp, leaving his family blissfully unaware. As with his other victims, Shipman proceeded to end Kathleen Grundy's life, carefully disguising his sinister intentions under the facade of a trusted physician. Little did he know that this particular victim had a daughter, Angela Woodruff, who was not just any daughter, but a lawyer. Suspicion crept into Woodruff's mind when she was informed of an inauthentic-looking will that supposedly bore her mother's signature. This dubious document excluded Woodruff and her children, but astonishingly left a staggering £386,000 to Shipman. Curious. She definitely smelled foul play. It was unlike her mother to pass and leave her family with nothing. With her legal acumen and a sense of justice, Woodruff promptly reported Shipman's suspicious activities to the authorities. This action set into motion an extensive investigation into the doctor's dark dealings. The investigation into Kathleen Grundy's tragic demise revealed damning evidence. Forensic scientists discovered traces of heroin diamorphine in her body, a substance often used to treat terminal cancer patients. The presence of such a powerful drug, combined with the anomalies in Grundy's will, raised red flags that could not be ignored. In fact, the forensic scientists stated that her death was consistent with the use or administration of a significant quantity of morphine or diamorphine, and similar values have been seen in fatalities attributed to morphine overdoses. Shipman attempted to deflect suspicion by asserting that Grundy had been addicted to drugs like codeine, morphine, or heroin, pointing to his own notes as evidence. However, the police uncovered a disturbing truth. These comments had been conveniently typed onto his computer after her death, along with the creation of the forged will. Shipman's deceitful web was unraveling. The evidence was simply overwhelming. Despite his lies and deceit, the authorities had no choice. Finally, on September 7, 1998, Harold Shipman was arrested, and his reign of terror was finally brought into the harsh light of justice. The police's thorough investigation soon uncovered a pattern of lethal doses of diamorphine administered by Shipman to multiple patients. He had falsely registered their deaths and edited their medical histories to portray them as terminally ill, leaving a trail of deception and tragedy in his wake. Consequences. In the year 2000, Harold Shipman faced the grim consequences of his horrific crimes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a stern recommendation that he should never be released back into society. Furthermore, the General Medical Council struck him off, effectively ending his medical career and removing any possibility of practicing medicine ever again. Initially incarcerated in Manchester Prison, Shipman's notoriety as one of the most prolific serial killers in British history marked him as an exceptionally dangerous inmate. Consequently, he was later transferred to HMP Frankland in Durham, a high-security prison known for housing some of the United Kingdom's most notorious criminals. The dark saga of Harold Shipman reached its chilling conclusion in January 2004 on the eve of his 58th birthday. Trapped within the cold confines of Wakefield Prison in West Yorkshire, Shipman chose to take his own life, bringing an end to the chapter of his life marred by monstrous deeds. In a tragic and unsettling turn of events, it was reported that Shipman had confided in his probation officer about his contemplation of suicide. His disturbing motive behind this decision was a morbid desire to ensure that his widow would receive his pension in a lump sum, further underscoring the twisted nature of his final act. The suicide of Harold Shipman marked a somber conclusion to a life that had inflicted immeasurable pain and suffering upon countless victims and their families. The true number of victims claimed by Harold Shipman remains one of the most haunting mysteries in the annals of serial killers. While he was convicted of the murders of 15 patients, the actual extent of his crimes is a subject of speculation, with some estimates suggesting a staggering number far beyond the speculated. Quantifying his crimes. In the end, the true extent of Shipman's crimes may never be known definitively. Some of the victims' remains were cremated, making it impossible to conduct post-mortem examinations that would have revealed the cause of death. Additionally, Shipman took his own life in prison, depriving investigators of any potential confessions or further insight into his actions. In essence, the unsettling legacy of Harold Shipman is a chilling reminder of the elusive nature of serial killers and the difficulty in quantifying the true scope of their crimes. While we may never have a concrete number, the sheer volume of suspicious deaths that occurred under his care continues to haunt those who seek to understand the depths of his malevolence. Harold Shipman was tried and convicted of murdering 15 patients. These convictions were based on substantial evidence, including toxicology reports and the pattern of his actions. Each of these cases represented a life tragically cut short by Shipman's sinister deeds. However, many investigators, journalists, and experts have speculated that Shipman's true body count could be much higher than the 15 he was convicted of. Some theory suggests that he may have been responsible for over 200 deaths during his medical career. These speculations are fueled by the starting number of deaths that occurred under his care, especially among his elderly patients. Shipman's modus operandi was consistent across his known victims. He administered lethal doses of prescription medication, particularly heroin, under the guise of medical treatment. His actions often resulted in sudden and unexpected deaths that were initially attributed to natural causes. What do you think of Harold Shipman? Was he simply a victim of circumstance and trauma, or a wicked, vindictive killer with no remorse?